The day I signed the deed to the lake house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. For 15 years, I wore the badge in one of the toughest precincts in the city. I'd seen the darkest corners of humanity: murders, robberies, broken families, lies that could cut deeper than any knife. The job was noble, but it was also relentless. I gave it everything, and in return, it drained me dry. So, when the opportunity came to buy a quiet house on the lake, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't luxurious. 2 bedrooms, a porch that needed sanding, and a dock that leaned a little too. Much to the left, but it was peace. And peace was worth more than gold. I remember pulling up in the moving truck that morning, Max, my German shepherd, leaping out and sprinting circles around the yard. He sniffed the air, barked once at the waterfowl, then flopped into the grass like he'd found heaven. "This is it, buddy," I said, scratching behind his ears. Home. I had just lifted my first box when I heard the sharp click of high heels on asphalt. A woman was striding across the street with the confidence of someone who believed the ground should part for her. She was in her 50s, tall, with bleached hair pulled into a ponytail so severe it looked like it hurt. Her sunglasses were the oversized kind that covered half her face. And in her arms, a thick binder, like she was about to audit my taxes. "Excuse me," she barked, stopping at the edge of my driveway. I turned, squinting in the morning sun. "Morning. Can I help you?" "You can't just move in here without clearance," she said, flipping open her binder like she was a prosecutor about to make her case. "Clearance?" I repeated. "Yes. This is an HOA community. We have standards: lawn length, vehicle type, dock usage, garbage day compliance. Everything must be approved through me, the president of the association." I blinked at her, trying to decide if this was a prank. "Ma'am, I bought this property outright. It's not part of an HOA. I checked the records before I signed." Her lips pursed. "That's what he told you. But rules are rules, and I intend to enforce them." I leaned against the truck, crossing my arms. "Look, I don't mean any disrespect, but there's no HOA here. You can't enforce rules that don't exist." The woman stiffened, her sunglasses flashing like a shield. "We'll see about that." And just like that, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her immaculate 2-story home across the street. Max growled low in his throat. I patted his head. "Relax, boy. She's just noise." But I underestimated her. Over the next week, Karen made it her mission to prove she was more than noise. On Monday morning, she marched up my driveway with a clipboard. "Your grass is already over 3 inches. That's a violation." On Wednesday, she snapped photos of my truck. "Oversized vehicles aren't allowed. You'll be fined." On Friday, I found a bright orange notice of violation taped to my door. It looked official: bold letters, stern language, threats of penalties, but when I inspected it, I realized it was homemade. She had designed her own HOA notices on a home printer. I chuckled at the audacity, but behind that laugh was an uneasy truth. This wasn't just eccentric behavior. This was obsession. By the second week, Karen's harassment escalated. One evening, I was mending a broken fence when she stormed into my yard uninvited. "This is your final warning," she announced, arms crossed. "If you don't comply with the association's regulations, I'll have you evicted." I set down my hammer, staring at her. "Lady, there is no association. You're making this up. Now leave." Her face turned crimson. "You'll regret this. I've already spoken to the sheriff. He's on my side." I couldn't help but laugh. "Good luck with that." She spun around and stormed off, muttering something about law and order. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Years of detective work had trained my instincts well, and something about her obsession set off alarms in my head. People like Karen didn't bluff. They escalated, and I was right. The following week, the incidents multiplied. She stood across the street with binoculars, inspecting my porch furniture. She followed me to the dock, snapping pictures of me fishing. She left anonymous letters in my mailbox, typed in all caps, warning me that imminent removal was coming if I didn't comply with her laws. Max grew restless. Every time she approached, his hackles rose, his bark sharp and warning. I had to leash him whenever I saw her lurking, afraid she might provoke him just to claim he was dangerous. One afternoon, I caught her shaking a bag of treats at the edge of my yard, trying to coax Max toward her. That was the last straw. "Hey!" I barked, storming out the door. "Step away from my dog?" She jumped, then straightened her shoulders. "I was just checking that he wasn't aggressive. HOA regulations." I cut her off, my voice steel. "Karen, you step foot on my property again, and I'll treat it as trespassing. Do you understand?" Her lips trembled with anger, but she didn't argue. She marched back across the street, her binder clutched tight to her chest. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, that she'd finally realize she couldn't push me around. But Karen wasn't built to back down. The next morning, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, I saw her pacing in her driveway, cell phone glued to her ear. Her voice carried across the still air. "Yes, officer, I'm reporting a trespasser. Yes, he's armed, dangerous, and squatting in the house across from me. Please send units immediately." The blood drained from my face as the words sank in. Karen had finally crossed the line. She wasn't just pretending to run an HOA anymore. She had called 911. On me. And in that moment, my peaceful escape turned into a battlefield. The morning Karen decided to play her final card started out like every other in my new home. Quiet, calm, peaceful. The lake was glassy, reflecting the pines on its surface. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, and a light mist hung over the water, like a veil. I stood on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee in my hand, Max at my feet, his ears twitching at every distant sound. For a moment, I forgot the stress of the city, the years of chasing shadows through alleys and crime scenes. Here, there was only the hum of cicadas, the gentle lapping of water against the dock, and the warmth of the rising sun. But peace, I'd learned, was fragile, and Karen had a way of shattering it. She was across the street again, pacing in her driveway with the cell phone pressed to her ear. I didn't pay her much mind at first. Karen lived on the phone, but then her voice rose, sharp enough to carry across the street. "Yes, officer," she said. "I'm reporting a trespasser. Yes, armed, dangerous, squatting in the house across from me." I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. "Send units immediately," she finished before snapping the phone shut with a satisfied smirk. Max growled low, sensing my tension. I set the coffee down slowly, my mind already racing. Karen had finally crossed. The line I knew she would, weaponizing the system. False 911 calls weren't just irritating, they were dangerous. Cops rushing in on bad intel could end in tragedy. 10 minutes later, I heard it. The distant wail of sirens. Max barked sharply, ears pinned back. I stood, my heartbeat steady but heavy, as two police cruisers rounded the corner, lights flashing, sirens piercing the quiet morning. Gravel crunched under their tires as they skidded to a stop in my driveway. Karen was already at the edge of my yard, waving her arms like a conductor leading an orchestra. "That's him," she shrieked. "That's the trespasser. He's dangerous. Arrest him before he hurts someone." Both officers jumped out of their cruisers, hands near their holsters. "Sir, step away from the porch." One barked, his voice firm. "Hands where we can see them." I raised my palms calmly, years of experience guiding my every move. "Easy, officers. I live here." Karen's voice screeched over mine. "Lies! He broke into that house last week. He's been threatening me in the neighborhood ever since." Her words poured out like poison, each one designed to paint me as a violent intruder. One officer, younger and visibly tense, pointed toward me. "Sir, we need to see some ID. Now," Max growled, and I gave him a firm command. "Sit." He obeyed instantly, though his eyes never left the officers. I moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into my back pocket. I knew better than anyone how dangerous sudden movements could look to jumpy cops. I pulled out my wallet and stepped forward, extending it toward the older officer. He opened it, expecting just a driver's license, but his eyes widened when he saw what was tucked inside. A badge. Detective, City Police Department. The younger officer froze, his expression shifting from suspicion to shock. "You're a detective?" I nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. Detective Daniels. This is my residence. I bought it 2 months ago. I've got the deed inside if you want to see it." Karen's jaw dropped. No, he's lying. That's fake. He's pretending to be a cop." The older officer shot her a hard look. "Ma'am, that's a real badge, and unless you've got hard evidence, you've just wasted emergency resources on a false report." Her face flushed scarlet. She stomped her foot like a child denied candy. "No, you don't understand. He doesn't follow the HOA rules. He threatened me. He... There is no HOA here," I said evenly, cutting her off. "You made that up, and now you've escalated to filing a false police report. That's a crime." Her eyes darted between me, the officers, and the gathering crowd of neighbors who had peeked out from behind curtains and were now slowly stepping onto their porches. "Arrest him!" she shrieked desperately. "He's dangerous. He's tricking you." But the officers weren't buying it anymore. The younger one rubbed the back of his neck, clearly embarrassed. "Detective, looks like we were called under false pretenses. Apologies for the disturbance." I slipped my wallet back into my pocket, never taking my eyes off Karen. "Don't apologize. You responded to a call in good faith, but I nodded toward Karen. "She just committed a felony." Her bravado cracked then. She stumbled, backward, shaking her head. I didn't mean it like that. I just wanted him gone. He doesn't belong here." The older officer looked at me. "Detective, do you want to press charges?" Karen gasped, her sunglasses slipping down her nose to reveal wide, panicked eyes. "Press charges? You can't. I was protecting the community." I crossed my arms, my voice steady but sharp. "You abused 911. You endangered officers. You tried to have me arrested in my own home. That's not protecting anyone. That's harassment." Her desperation grew. "Please, you can't do this to me. I'm the president of this neighborhood. I make the rules." I let out a short laugh. "Not anymore, Karen. Not after today." The younger officer retrieved his cuffs, but I held up a hand. "No, I'll handle this myself." And with that, I stepped toward Karen, my badge gleaming in the sunlight. For the first time since I'd moved in, she looked genuinely afraid. And she should have been, because the game she had been playing was over. The world seemed to hold its breath. Karen stood in the middle of my driveway, trembling with outrage, her sunglasses hanging crooked on her face. Behind her, a cluster of neighbors had gathered, drawn out of their homes by the flashing patrol, lights and the sound of her screeching. Curtains twitched, cell phones glowed, whispers spread like wildfire. And me? I stepped forward slowly, my badge gleaming in my hand. Every step I took, Karen shrank back a little further, like a bully finally realizing the playground wasn't hers to rule. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but commanding. "You filed a false police report. You called 911, claimed I was armed and dangerous, and you wasted the time of these officers. Do you understand how serious that is?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She was sputtering now, no script to follow, no binder of fake rules to clutch. I was protecting the neighborhood. I had every right. You don't belong here." The older officer, arms crossed, shook his head. "Ma'am, what you did is a crime. You lied to emergency services. That could have gotten someone hurt, or worse." Karen's eyes darted to the crowd, searching desperately for an ally. But the neighbors weren't supporting her. If anything, they looked relieved, like someone had finally called out the tyrant who'd ruled their cul-de-sac for years. Please, she stammered, trying to play the victim now. I was scared. He threatened me. Enough, I said, cutting her off. Karen, you're under arrest. Her face drained of color. No, you can't do this to me. I'm the HOA president. I'm in charge here. I took out my handcuffs, the metal glinting in the morning sun. There is no HOA. That was a lie, just like your 911 call. The younger officer stepped forward, but I raised a hand. I've got this. He nodded, stepping back, letting me take the lead. I approached Karen slowly, giving her one last chance. Turn around, hands behind your back. She staggered backward, her heels scraping against the pavement. You wouldn't dare. You can't humiliate me like this in front of everyone. I met her eyes, unflinching. Karen, you did that? To yourself. With a swift motion, I clasped the cuffs around her wrists. The metallic click echoed like a gavel. Her scream split the air. No, this isn't happening. You can't treat me like a criminal. I'm not a criminal. But her words fell on deaf ears. The neighbors were watching, phones raised, recording every second. Some gasped, others whispered. A few even clapped quietly. You wanted a scene, I said as I guided her toward the squad car. Now you've got one. She fought every step of the way, twisting, yelling, throwing insults like daggers. This is harassment. You'll regret this. I'll sue you. I'll sue the entire police department. You'll lose your badge. I kept my grip firm but calm, her voice little more than noise to me now. Years on the job had taught me that criminals, whether hardened felons or suburban tyrants, always had the same reaction when caught: denial, anger, desperation, and Karen was going through them all. When I opened the cruiser door, she tried one last time to appeal to the crowd. You all see this, don't you? He's abusing his power. He's lying. I was protecting you. But the reaction wasn't what she expected. From the back of the crowd, an elderly man stepped forward, his voice shaking but strong. Protecting us? Karen, you've been tormenting us for years. You fined me $200 for painting my shutters beige instead of approved santan. You're no protector. You're a bully. A middle-aged woman nodded, adding, You threatened to take away my dock rights because my kids left pool toys in the yard. We've all been afraid to speak up, but not anymore. The murmurs grew into a wave of agreement. One by one, the neighbors voiced their grievances, stories of harassment, fake fines, threats, and intimidation. Karen's eyes widened in horror. The fortress of fear she'd built was crumbling right in front of her. Lies, she shrieked. All lies. I was maintaining order. You'll regret turning against me. But no one listened. The crowd was with me now. I guided her into the back seat of the cruiser, her protest muffled as the door slammed shut. For the first time since I'd moved in, the street was silent, except for the quiet hum of whispered relief. The older officer approached me, shaking his head with a small grin. Detective, I've seen my fair share of neighborhood disputes, but this one takes the cake. I chuckled softly. She's been running a fake HOA, bullying everyone. I guess she thought she could bully me, too. The officer glanced back at the cruiser where Karen was still shouting incoherently behind the glass. You pressing charges? I looked around at the faces of the neighbors, the weary, hopeful faces of people who had endured her tyranny for too long. Then I nodded. Absolutely. A ripple of relief passed through the crowd. Some clapped. Others simply smiled, as though a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. Thank you, Detective, the elderly man said, his voice breaking. We didn't know how to stop her. I gave him a reassuring nod. Don't thank me. Just enjoy your freedom. She won't be bothering you anymore. As the cruisers pulled away, Karen's muffled screams faded into the distance. I stood there on my porch, Max sitting faithfully by my side, and for the first time, the lake felt truly quiet. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because people, like Karen, never go down quietly. And the battle ahead, courtrooms, hearings, her desperate attempts to claw back power, was only just beginning. The days after Karen's arrest were quiet, almost too quiet. For the first time since I'd moved into the lake house, there were no fake fines shoved under my door, no shrill voice barking across the street about violations, no one snapping photos of me unloading groceries or trimming hedges. The silence was almost suspicious, but it didn't last. 3 days later, I was summoned to the courthouse. Karen had posted bail, and her lawyer had filed for an emergency hearing to dismiss the charges against her. It was classic Karen, refusing to accept reality, convinced she could talk or threaten her way out of trouble. When I arrived at the courthouse, the lobby was buzzing. Reporters, neighbors, curious onlookers, they were all there. Word had spread fast that the self-proclaimed HOA president had been arrested by one of her own neighbors, and they wanted to see the showdown. Inside the courtroom, Karen sat at the defendant's table, still trying to look important in a sharp blazer and pearls. But the cuffs on her wrists, the deputies flanking her, and the wild, desperate glint in her eyes betrayed the truth. She spotted me as I entered and hissed, "Traitor! You ruined everything." I ignored her, taking my seat at the witness stand. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, entered. Court is now in session. Karen's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, stood immediately. "Your Honor, my client was merely acting in the best interests of her community. She believed the plaintiff to be an armed trespasser. Surely, such a misunderstanding does not warrant criminal charges." The judge raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding." She called 911, reported her neighbor as armed and dangerous, and fabricated the existence of a homeowners association to justify her actions. That is not a misunderstanding, counselor. That is fraud, harassment, and a false report. Karen shot to her feet, unable to stay silent. "I am the HOA president. I've always been the president. These people need rules. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart." The judge's gavel cracked down. "Mrs. Simmons, sit down and remain silent until spoken to." Her lawyer tugged at her sleeve, trying to calm her, but Karen yanked her arm away. "She wasn't done. They're lying about me," she screamed, pointing at me. "He's the liar. He's pretending to be a detective just to make me look bad. He forged that badge." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I stood slowly, my badge gleaming under the lights. "Detective Daniels, City Police Department, 20 years on the force. My credentials have been verified." The judge nodded. "And indeed they have. Mrs. Simmons, another outburst like that and you will be held in contempt." Karen's face twisted into rage, but she slumped back into her chair, muttering under her breath. The prosecution presented its case methodically. Neighbors testifying one by one about years of harassment, fabricated fines, threats, and intimidation. The elderly man spoke about his shutters. The mother recalled how Karen screamed at her kids. Another neighbor described how Karen once threatened to have his dock removed if he didn't repaint his fence. Each testimony was another nail in her coffin. By the time it was my turn to testify, the jury already looked disgusted with her, recounted everything. The fake HOA binder she waved in my face the day I moved in, the escalating harassment, and finally the false 911 call that nearly turned into a dangerous police standoff. When I finished, Karen's lawyer barely even cross-examined me. He knew it was over. Karen, however, didn't. When the judge gave her a chance to speak, she launched into a tirade. "You're all ungrateful. I kept this neighborhood beautiful. I enforced the rules when no one else would. Without me, this place will turn into chaos. Yards overgrown, houses mismatched, docks cluttered. You need me." The judge let her rant for a moment, then slammed the gavel again. "Mrs. Simmons, what this neighborhood needs is relief from your harassment." The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to community service, heavy fines, and probation, with the threat of jail time if she violated terms. But most importantly, she was banned from serving in any leadership capacity for housing associations, neighborhood boards, or community councils. The self-proclaimed queen had lost her crown, as deputies led her away, still yelling about restoring order. I caught the eyes of my neighbors. For the first time, they looked free, smiling, laughing. Some even clapped as Karen was escorted out in cuffs. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me. "Detective Daniels, how does it feel to have brought down the so-called HOA tyrant?" It kept my answer simple. Justice isn't about power. It's about truth. And the truth is, Karen abused hers. That night, back at the lake house, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter. Kids played in the yards without fear of fines. Couples strolled along the docks without someone snapping photos of them. Porch lights glowed warmly instead of nervously. And me? I sat on my porch with Max at my feet, sipping a cold drink as the sun dipped below the trees. For the first time, the lake wasn't just a house. It was home. Karen had tried to turn it into a battlefield, but in the end, she only exposed herself for what she was, a bully, a fraud, and a lesson, that no matter how loud someone yells, the truth always speaks louder. The neighborhood was free, and so was I.